And speaking of Bitcoin mining, our first guest today has some experience in that area. Jason Dean is a cryptocurrency analyst and an individual miner himself. Welcome, Jason.
Oh, it's great to be here, Galen. First event of the year for me, so it's great to be here to talk with you today.
And what a day, right? January 3rd, a day to celebrate. Bitcoin becomes a teenager. Let's talk about that for a minute. What does that mean to you as I think, the Genesis block mined on this date? What does that mean to you as an individual miner?
Well, I mean, it's an historic day. I mean, obviously for me, I wasn't aware of Bitcoin back in the day. At the time this was going on, I wasn't involved with the whole cypherpunk movement. But it was a few years later that I first discovered it. And here we are now talking about Bitcoin being 13 years old. I mean, I remember having conversations with people where we were saying, oh, Bitcoin's 5 or 6 years old. And suddenly we are here, a teenager. And how things have changed from where we are now. As you mentioned in your intro, that I am a miner. I've been mining actually Bitcoin for quite a few years now. Started as a hobby miner at home with the machine we nicknamed Big Blue back in the day, which was a homemade device that we had here, and are now mined with quite a few ASICs over in Siberia. And in fact, I was out there visiting it recently. And it just goes to show how fast this industry has grown and how big this thing has got in the last year and what is coming up. It's astronomical.
We've seen that actually over the past week with Bitcoin hash rate reaching record highs, recovering above the previous high, which was set ahead of that. You can see it here on the right side of this chart that we're looking at. The orange line represents the hash rate, and the white line there is the Bitcoin price in dollars. And you can see just here on the very right edge of the chart that peak coming above the prior peak, which was, I think, set in April of 2021. Is mining as an individual? I mean, you mentioned your beginnings as a hobby miner. I think those days are kind of gone. What is the state of mining today? Can a small investor hope to participate? Is Bitcoin still the kind of decentralized network that it once was?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things we can argue a case for both sides, I think. But look, if you're an individual now and you want to start mining, you can do it. You just can't do it really realistically from home in the way that you could have done, a few years ago, although it's quite a few years now. But it is possible. There are a lot of services out there where you can buy a single ASIC or even sometimes part of an ASIC miner just to get your sort of foot in the door, so to speak, and learn the trade effectively. I mean, it's pretty simple, but if you can understand the numbers and you understand the trends of Bitcoin and what you're doing with some good detail, it's a real advantage. But yes, it's possible to do. It's certainly a lot more expensive than it used to be, and you probably can't do it locally, as I say, but it is still possible. And I do believe Bitcoin is still very decentralized and probably always will be.
Certainly can't do it here in my home state of Massachusetts with the energy costs here being what they are.
No.
As an analyst now, what do you take away from? I think we've seen it over 200 exahashes. If I didn't misread that chart just now, what do you take away from that as a signal? I mentioned early on we see Bitcoin flowing onto exchanges in a kind of a reversal of a recent trend, but at the same time, obviously, more capital flowing into the mining side of things. What is that? What's that a signal for? How should we read that going into 2022?
Well, I mean, first of all, so we've got the obvious one, network security. Network security in Bitcoin is at an unprecedented high now, and that is just going to keep going. The investment at the moment in mining equipment, in Bitcoin mining generally, is absolutely astronomical. These companies are now publicly listed or going public because they want the capital to to invest in this equipment. And we've seen, I'm sure you've seen all the reports recently of all these huge numbers of ASICs that have been ordered by companies all around the world, but particularly in the US at the moment, which is a big growth area. And we are just going to see that hash rate continuing to rise. And I've heard talk of something like 200 to 250 exahash being added next year, or this year now, in 2022. And when you consider we're only about 190-ish, 200 now, we're talking about a doubling of the hash rate over the next sort of 12, probably to 24 months, I think. I think it will take a bit longer, but I have seen forecasts to that level. I mean, that's very significant increase, and that gives you some idea of the confidence that these companies and individuals like myself have in the Bitcoin network and Bitcoin itself as something of the future.
What do you think is driving it? A goal to run a mining operation at a profit, or is it more a goal to accumulate Bitcoin at a price perhaps lower than you might be able to secure it in the open market?
Well, both of those are valid strategies, actually. But we do know from the big mining operations that the vast majority of Bitcoin that they've mined, they've actually held. And I'm the same, actually. Everything I mine, I hold. So this is a trend we've seen right across the board. So there is a good argument, because clearly you can mine Bitcoin for less cost once you've got past the capital expense than you could buy it for. But, you know, the other part of this is profit. If you want to turn back into dollars and fund your operations, and some people do that, of course you can do that as well. But yeah, this is a growth area. We are in the gold rush period, I think, of Bitcoin mining right now. It's happening right now.
Long-term capital coming in at this stage. What else should we be looking at, if you can sort of think about some of the things that you're focused on, you know, as an analyst, as an investor, start of the year here, what's going to be important for us to watch in 2022?
Well, the words I always use are adoption and education, really. And the two things, of course, are very linked. Particularly on a retail level, it's pretty hard now to go anywhere without having some exposure to Bitcoin. So even if you're not involved with the Bitcoin industry at all, it will keep poking you. Now, you're going to see it around more and more, and that's going to ultimately drive your interest and adoption. Institutionally, we're also seeing that education process carry on, and I do believe we're going to see some quite big moves institutionally this year. And I do think we are going to see at least one other country adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender this year as well, possibly more. So big stuff going on. I'm very bullish for the future, as you probably guessed.